The Miami Heat just avoided what was going to be statistically the worst playoff choke of all time. And in dramatic fashion, too. They blew out the Celtics away at the Garden. They blew them out by, 20 points when it was all said and done. And after the end of the second quarter, it really wasn't ever that close outside of Derek White turning into what Jaylen Brown was supposed to be doing all game and being aggressive and drawing fouls and hitting threes. He did that for a portion of the third quarter, like maybe 3 minutes, brought them to within, I don't know, it was like 5-6 points, and then the Heat just went right back to destroying them. And I'm just going to go ahead and knock out the elephant in the room. We were robbed of probably a much better game than it was going to be because Jason Tatum stepped on Gabe Vincent's foot in literally the first play of the game. He twisted his left ankle and he was grimacing and in pain for the rest of the game, particularly in the second half because ankle injuries, once they get cold, they're very hard to warm back up again, and it is usually really painful. So it makes a lot of sense how Tatum was pretty much non-existent for the entire second half. But it wasn't all Jason Tatum being injured. I mean, the Heat came out and handled business tonight. Jimmy Butler was being much more aggressive and assertive with less pump fakes and more going straight up over defenders. And not only that, but the Heat shot the shit out of the ball. More specifically, Caleb Martin, who was robbed of his Eastern Conference Finals MVP because the NBA doesn't understand that just because they're the star of the team doesn't mean that they played the best. Jimmy Butler, while technically had the best stats in this playoff series, if they don't have Caleb Martin, they aren't even sniffing, maybe even winning a game. That's how important Caleb Martin was to this team this series. He was guarding Tatum on one end when they weren't in that zone, and then he was going on the other end and shooting like 65% from three. It was ridiculous. Every time he chucked something up, I was like, oh, well, that's in. And not only were the Heat shooting the ball very, very well, they were also playing excellent defense, switching from their man, which they didn't really go to a whole lot, to their zone, to their full court press for a little bit in the third quarter, which really didn't do much. But the zone was absolutely imperative for them to win this game. And I don't know why, because it's the same zone and double team scheme they've been running all series. And for some reason, the Celtics cannot break the zone. And I will say right now, since they're going to be playing the Nuggets, and I understand it's been working all playoffs, but I'm telling you right now, if you put Jokic in the middle by the elbows or by the free throw line, that zone is being broken in like 5 seconds inside. They're going to be a wide open three, a Jamal Murray coming off a pin down, or a DHO and getting a wide open midi, or Jokic is just going to eat Bam alive and back him down and hit a little post fade on him, a little hook. But anyway, we'll talk about that when we get there. What was important about this game tonight was the fact that Jaylen Brown was asked to step up essentially because Jason Tatum got hurt, and then Jaylen Brown proceeded to shoot like 8 for 23, 1 for 9 from 3, and had 19 points. I get Boston as a whole struggled to break this zone, but Jaylen Brown also had 8 turnovers, and some of them were especially sloppy. I can remember one towards the end of the game. He was in the corner one-on-one against Bam, took a couple dribbles to his left, and just lost the ball, and pretty much gave it right to Duncan Robinson, I'm pretty sure it was. Jaylen Brown has been great for the Celtics for most of the season and for most of the playoffs, but it's that kind of performance when you need him to be clutch that really makes you wonder if the Celtics are going to offer him that supermax this year. A lot of people are joking like, oh, Jaylen Brown's already a Houston Rocket. I just don't see him going anywhere else. I don't see him playing in any other jersey, but it's totally possible. He's going to be a free agent next summer if the Celtics and him don't agree on a giant supermax extension. And if you're the Celtics, you really got to ask yourselves, is this the guy that's going to get us over the hump? Is this the guy that's going to win the championship for Boston? I may understand Jason Tatum is the centerpiece. There's no doubt in that. But Jaylen Brown is a very, very good 1-2 punch. I understand he sucked tonight. He was very bad. But typically, he's a very good 1-2 punch. And people have been trying to break up the Jays for years now, ever since they were even drafted and they were both good. They're like, oh, they play the same position. They're both wings, so they couldn't possibly play well together. Well, that system works. It just didn't work tonight. I mean, if you're the Celtics, it's really disappointing because you got all your hopes up after going down 3-0 and then just to choke in TD Garden and watch Caleb Martin just rain threes on you. A man who was cut by the Charlotte Hornets. Caleb Martin was cut by the Charlotte Hornets and he just rained threes on the Boston Celtics in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Duncan Robinson also had a good night. He was 4 for 6 from the floor and 2 for 3 from 3, and he had a couple of nice cuts that led to nice layups, and he was just great tonight. And he didn't even have to play any other big man except Bam, because their zone was working so well. They didn't really need this defensive stopper in the middle. I understand Bam played 43 minutes, so they did technically, but they played 5 minutes worth of no Bam minutes, and it was working. They were trapping and they were getting stops, and it was surprising how well this zone was working when they didn't have a single big man on the floor. Like, Jimmy Butler was probably their tallest player. Actually, Duncan Robinson was probably their tallest player on the floor during those minutes, which, if that gives you any sort of perspective, that's kind of how this was going. The Heat were just putting the clamps on the Celtics on the offensive end, and the Celtics depend so much on Jason Tatum. Like, it's not even funny. And they also depend on the three ball a lot. And if Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are not getting downhill and making kickouts to wide open shooters, it's not a good recipe for the Celtics. When they were being successful and getting wide open shots, it had a lot to do with Tatum's ability to get deep into the paint and kick back out, or Jaylen Brown's ability to get into the mid-range and hit a couple jumpers, and then people are scared he's going to take those mid-range jumpers, and then he finds open players. That's how they were going to operate, and it simply wasn't working tonight because the Heat ran that weird zone that for some reason works in the NBA, and it makes no sense. Now, something that's a little worrying for you Miami Heat fans now that you're going to play the Nuggets, who have had like a week and a half off, is the fact that Bam Adebayo was pretty bad tonight. And if you remove his defensive capabilities, he played like shit tonight. I mean, he couldn't buy a bucket. He was 4 for 10 from the floor, and I can tell you right now, it felt like a lot more shots than that because he was hitting these little turnarounds and these pull-ups that he was doing in Game 6 that I was complaining about, and they weren't falling. They simply were not falling. He had 12 total points, and if you need Bam to produce and he can't do it against Robert Williams, he sure as hell is not going to do it against Nikola Jokic. Jokic isn't the defender that Robert Williams is, but he's much better offensively, way more gifted. I mean, we don't even have to talk about this. The man is a 2-time MVP. He's going to eat that zone alive if the Heat try to run it against them, which I don't anticipate them doing, but it's given them so much success in the playoffs that why would they not try it? Would the Heat start doubling at the elbow and make Jokic give it up? Which is not a bad idea, but then you're essentially saying, here, Jeff Green or Jamal Murray or KCP or Michael Porter Jr., here's a wide open three that you kind of have to get off decently quick because we're closing out, but it's relatively open in NBA standards. And that isn't going to get the job done. I mean, the Nuggets have been shooting the shit out of the ball this entire playoffs. It's not going to work. So I'll be interested to see what Eric Spoelstra cooks up for the NBA Finals, but as it pertains to the Eastern Conference Finals Game 7, that game was pretty boring and mundane. It was hyped up a lot, but it was pretty boring. I mean, the Miami Heat were just manhandling them for most of the game. And while they did sort of get into it, it really wasn't that competitive because it was just obvious the Heat were in the driver's seat for most of the game, and the Celtics just couldn't get anything to fall, and they couldn't fall back on Jason Tatum hitting crazy step-back threes. It was a mess. It was a nightmare for the Celtics is really what it was, because you go out there and your star player gets hurt on the very first play by falling on a leg of a man who's laying on the ground. He just so happened to twist his ankle on it. And the fact that Tatum tried to play through it is respectable, but I mean, he was almost hurting them this game. And it's not like Malcolm Brogdon was any better. He came onto the floor and then airballed a three and then got benched again. Those are pretty much my takeaways. It would have been cool to see the Celtics be the first team to come back from a 3-0 deficit, but I mean, this was, like I was saying, this was inevitable. I was saying that in the conference finals are over video, and I was technically right. While it ended up going to Game 7, I was technically right. That's pretty much it. Y'all take care. We'll talk about the finals in a bit. Have a good one.
Jaylen Brown's gone. He's going to go to Houston. Jason Tatum's going to continue to sell games for us.
Fire Mazzulla, get Mike Budenholzer, and Giannis will come. Yep. Giannis, we need you. Jaylen Brown, go to Atlanta or Udoka. Get the fuck out of Boston.